Welcome to my market update for homeowners and potential home buyers. I am sure for everyone out here who owns a home or thinking about buying a home is wondering how this pandemic and the shutdown of our American economy affects us all. So the question on people's mind is, will surging unemployment crush home sales? More than 22 million Americans have lost their jobs so far during this pandemic. The next announced unemployment rate will be on May 8th. Because the health crisis brought the economy to a screeching halt, many are feeling a personal financial crisis. We're all uncertain as to when the recently unemployed will be able to return to work. How badly will the U.S. economy be damaged if people can't buy homes? A new concern is whether the high number of unemployed Americans will cause the residential real estate market to crash, putting a greater strain on the economy and leading to even more job losses. The housing industry is a major part of the overall economy in this country. How has the unemployment rate affected home sales in the past? It's logical to think there would be a direct correlation between the unemployment rate and home sales. As the unemployment rate went up, home sales would go down. And when the unemployment rate went down, home sales would go up. I am looking at Goldman Sachs unemployment rate projections. They're projecting that for this year, the height of the number is going to be 15%. There are a lot of projections. JP Morgan thinks it's going to be 8.5%. The Congressional Budget Office thinks it's going to be 12%. But I want to take one of the more dire projections so we can prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So what they are saying going forward, the unemployment rate is going to hit 15% this year. It'll be somewhere between 6 and 8% next year, then down to 5% in 2022, and then down to 4% over the next couple of years. So it's nowhere near what we originally thought it would be, and nowhere near what I am hearing some people are saying, like, oh, this is going to be the Great Recession all over again. I'll cover that with a slide in a second, but first I want to kill a myth that unemployment rate has a major impact on home sales. Research reviewing the last 30 years doesn't show that direct relationship, as noted in 3 instances of that by this graph on your screen. The blue and gray bars represent home sales, while the yellow line is the unemployment rate. First up, to the left of the chart, in the early 1990s, the unemployment rate went up to 7.5%. Home sales continued to increase. In the early 2000s, the unemployment rate went up to 6%, and guess what? Home sales continued to increase somewhat dramatically. Then the third one, when the housing crash occurred, the unemployment rate shot up to 9.6%, and yes, home sales fell, and I am sure that has a major piece to do with it. But understand that was also the time when banks just shut off lending. There were buyers that were mortgageable, but yet they couldn't get a mortgage because banks were so tight in their new standards. Now, the fourth piece we want to look at for the last few years, the unemployment rate has been dropping like a rock, but look at the home sales. They remained flat. So really, there's not a direct correlation. Now, I understand that 15% is different than 9.6%. I also understand that it could have an effect. And we'll look at that effect as we look at how many people, in fact, do lose their jobs. And we'll look at who those people are and how quickly could they get those jobs back in another session. But this comparison to doomsday projections just doesn't fly. The impact of the unemployment rate on home sales doesn't seem to be as strong as we may have thought, which lead one to this question. How does this compare to the other financial crisis? In the Great Depression, look at the unemployment rate for 6 years. 4 of those 6 years, it was over 20%. Now remember, in the graph we showed you before, when the unemployment rate went up to 7.5%, it did not. That number did not impact home sales. Home sales continued to rise. So if we use 8% as the barometer, anything over 8%, there could be a challenge. Then we can see In the Great Recession, we had 3 years in a row of over 8% unemployment, and that definitely was a challenge. But if we look at the projections from Goldman Sachs, and again, they have probably the most conservative projections, they think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than most people think. But even if we use those dire projections, what we're looking at is, yeah, we're going to have a tough time this year, all right. We're going to have to come out the other side, and the people who do have jobs, and even if it's a 15% unemployment rate, remember, 85% of the people will still have jobs. So let's not think that it's all over for home sales going forward. You might ask, isn't this time different? Yes, there is no doubt the country hasn't seen job losses this quickly in almost 100 years. But understand that what just happened on the American economy? Someone hit the pause button. Now, this is not 2008. 2008 was like a tornado. It came rushing through, destroyed all the buildings, and leveled everything right down to the foundation. When the tornado passed through, we had to rebuild all those buildings. It took years to rebuild that town, just like it took years after 2008 to rebuild the housing market and rebuild the mortgage market even more so. This, what we are going through right now, is like a snowstorm. There's 6 feet of snow on the ground and it's still snowing. But eventually the snow is going to stop, and after that, the snow that's there is going to melt. All the buildings are still intact, and I am not saying we're going to go right back to the way it was immediately, but it's not going to take us long. We don't have to rebuild anything. We just have to get back to work. So there's a difference between those two. We're in for a wild ride over the next 90 days, the second quarter of this year, but we're also in for a wild ride up through the rest of the year. So if you look at the graph right here, you can see that every one of the major financial institutions that I have on the graph agree that's exactly going to happen. We're going to have what they call V type of recovery. Strong down, strong up. Like you took a tennis ball and threw it as hard as you could against the ground, it would bounce right back up again. And everyone is agreeing to that, and that's the good news. So what's the bottom line? I've given you the facts as I know them. The housing market will have challenges this year. There is no denying that. However, with the help being given to those who have lost their jobs and the fact that we're looking at a quick recovery for the economy after we address the health problem, the housing industry should be fine in the long term. I'll be back after May 8th with another video update to discuss the Labor Department numbers and analysis from the financial community on how the housing industry will be affected. As always, feel free to contact me with any real estate questions you may have. Please, everybody, stay safe. Thank you.